Hey, how's it going, guys? Daniel here, aka HashLips, and welcome back to the final video of this series where we created a code generated artwork tool slash awesomeness thing. So what we're going to be focusing on in this video is kind of creating the metadata. So let's jump right into the last series. So we're going to start off with a bit of cleanup work. So we're going to cut this out there and move it a bit higher, the import for the config, because I would like to use my width and my height over there, just so that we make use of variables, and so it's not all over the place. The next thing that I would like to do is we have this addition, right? But there's something that we can do that's a bit better, right? So whenever we kick off node, we can pass it parameters. So what I actually want to do is I want to write const, and then we can say my args, and we're going to equal it to the process. So node has a process, and we get the args, and we're going to slice it. We're going to slice the second one, and now we get the arguments. And the arguments that I'm talking about, if you look down here in the terminal, if we type in node.js, whatever we type here is an argument that gets split by a space, and that gets filled in by an array into my arg. So it's an array. And what we're going to do here in the addition is we're actually going to say, well, this could be my arg. So let's check my args.length, okay? And if the length is greater than 0, what we want to do is we actually want to use that argument. So we will say that we want to use my args 0, right? But we also want to wrap that in a number, because the thing is, this might be text and we actually want it to break if it's not a number. And also we want to pass it, right? So otherwise, we're just going to create one image. So what did this code do, you might ask? So let's focus on this output field and also at the terminal. And also, let's get rid of these console.logs, because they're just going to clutter it everywhere. Maybe let's leave this one there. That's fine. Let's clear the console and let's run it. So basically, if I run this now and I don't pass any arguments, I just run it, what happens? Created one addition. And why is that? Because here at the top of the addition, it didn't find any arguments. So this failed, and it actually just said create one. So it created a beautiful artwork for us, but it just did one. What makes this cool now is because we can, in the terminal, again run node index.js, but this time let's pass 3. When we run it, you can see creating addition 1, 2, 3, and it's created 3 elements for us. So, well, 3 images for us. I like this one, it's pretty cool. But anyway, that's the first kind of refactor that we want to do to make it much more convenient for us to run our code. The second thing is that we need a few extra parameters here when we want to actually deal with the metadata. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use var metadata. So I'm going to create a metadata, which is going to be an array. We're also going to have a attributes equal to array, and we're going to have a hash, because what we actually want to do with the hash is get the elements and the layers in a hash, so we actually can backtrack what we've done with that image for whenever we want to rebuild it somewhere else, you know, where we don't have this generative code, which is pretty cool. Maybe I'll show that in a later series. Then we have a decoded hash as well, which is also going to be an array. Now, here's our 4 metadata things that we're going to be using, and I'll show you now how we're going to be adding them. Now, what we can do is let's maybe create a function right under the save layer. We can call this add metadata. Is going to be equal to a function, and there shouldn't be a space. Cool. So we have this function, and this function is going to be called, right? Let's see, where should we call this function? Okay, so you're going to have to call this function right after we've created the element over here. So right after the element, we can create this here, and we're going to pass it actually, let me think. We're going to have to need the element. So let's pass in the element, and we also want the layer. So the reason why we want the element and the layer separately is because we want to know which element was selected in this phase of the loop, and also at what layer it was, okay? So when we go back to our thing, we can say that we need an element, and we also need a layer, right? So cool. So now that we have that, we can start with some basic things. So let's first create a temp metadata. Okay, sorry, my brain is a bit fried, so I'm thinking all the time while I'm typing. Okay, so we need metadata, and we also need maybe a datetime, right? And then what we're going to do with datetime is what? We're going to say we need the date.now, I believe. Okay, so we're just going to get a timestamp there. Maybe we can call the timestamp, doesn't matter. What we then going to do is in this temp metadata, we're actually going to have a few parameters. So we're going to have a hash. Let's just flesh them out before we fill them in. Decoded hash, right? I think you know we'd be going with this. We need the edition, so we know what edition this was. We're going to need a date, which we can just set to the date time at the top. And then we need attributes, which is going to be equal to an array of attributes. That's correct. This is also going to be an array. I'll see now what we're going to do. But the last thing that we want to do is once we've set this up, okay, we want to actually push this to our metadata field up here. So right at the bottom here, we're going to say metadata.push, and we want to push the temp metadata object. Now we're going to be filling in this metadata array, okay, because what we want to do is at the end of this whole looping structure, we want to actually go and call metadata in here. So metadata, add metadata. Just think about this. Okay, we're probably not going to need the metadata here. Okay, we need the edition here because we need to call the metadata every time after this has ran, right? Because for each loop, this needs to pass in, okay, this needs to pass in the edition. Okay, so we're going to call metadata there. I said we're going to call metadata here, just ignore that for now. That is going to have to be at the attributes. So we're going to have a separate one for that. But what we want to do is after this metadata has been added, we just want to push it up, okay? The next thing that we want to probably do is then create that add attributes file, because the thing is we also need to populate these things still, but we'll get to that. So let's say add attributes is going to be that, and then this is actually where we're going to take the element and the layer. Okay, so here where we were calling add metadata should be add attribute, because each layer needs to add an attribute, not the whole metadata, right? Okay, cool. So that makes more sense. Here we're going to do kind of the same structure as the metadata, but this time we're just going to add a bit less, I would say. So let me think about this. All right, so we have the element, we have that. We need an ID, which is going to be equal to the element .id, because remember the element that we are pulling back from config, when we look at the get elements thing, it has these fields. So we actually have an ID, we also have a name and all that sweet stuff. So what we are going to do is we are going to put the layer, and at this case we want the layer.name, okay, because we want to know from which layer this came from, what attribute this is. It doesn't need to tell us the layer's ID. I would rather like to see the ID of the element and then what layer it was. We're also going to have a name field, which will take the element's name. And then lastly, we need the rarity. Okay, we need the rarity from element dot rarity. All right, so that's basically what we need. And then because we have this at the top there, we're going to do the same thing where we push this temp attribute. Okay, we push this temp attribute, but then there's a few things that we need to do too. We need to say hash.push. Okay, so for each attribute we want to push the layer.id, and the reason for that is because we want to see for each attribute, we want to kind of push onto the layer so we know which layer we which layer we hit, but directly after that we run this again. Now you can do this in a bit different way, but I'm just doing it this way so I can decode it down here. Okay, the reason for this will be much more apparent when I run this and actually show you what it renders out. So what I'm going to basically be doing here is I'm going to say that we want the layer.id, and then as the value we just want the element.id. So the decoded hash is there for us to kind of say, okay, cool, this is how we decode the thing, and these things that's getting pushed is just going to be pushed onto one array which we're going to join, which I'll show you guys now. So after each attribute has been added, it loops through the layers, how many layers there are, and finally we call metadata right at the very bottom of our loop. So what we need to do now is actually, let's think about it. We need to go down and say, okay, cool. Just think what's going to happen here. So here we run this, everything needs to be pushed, so we need kind of now to add these things. So for the hash we need hash.join. so we're going to join this hash with that, right? For the decoded, we're just going to keep it as decoded hash because we want an array in there. This is going to be the addition that we're importing here at the top of the function. We have got the datetime, and then attributes going to be attributes. Again, if you're using JavaScript, if there's the same, you can just omit this, but let's just leave it for readability. But this is going to reference that attribute, the global one. Now after this, we want to push this to our metadata, okay? And then what we want to do is we want to clear this stuff, okay? Because after pushing this to the metadata, we want to clear it. So what do we want to clear? We want to go and clear the attributes array, because the thing is the global attributes array needs to be reused. We need to clear the hash, and we need to clear the decoded hash. And that's our cleanup before we push. So what will happen is, let's just run through this. Here it will go into a draw function. It will call add attribute. We'll pass the element. Let's say this was the small eye color, and we'll say this is eye color for the layer, right? We'll go into attributes, populate this object with all the new information that we have, push it to the attributes. It will push the hash, the decoded hash, and then once we get to this metadata function, which is called right after each loop, right, passes in there, we can actually add this. We push this to the metadata structure, but we're not rendering it yet. So the thing that we need to now take in consideration is where should we be writing this, okay? So because this is being pushed, this is being pushed there, and then we've created the element, and now we need to actually do something with it. So what we can do is right here at the bottom, because how Node works is it's going to get stuck in this loop before it exits and comes down to this line. So right at the bottom, we can actually then go and let's read the file. So what I want us to do is I want us to read an output. So we're going to put everything in output, and we're going to look for the metadata .json file. Okay, so this is what we're going to read, and then what we can do is we need to say error and then the data. I don't think we're going to use that, but let's just have it in here. And what we can do is we can say if there's an error, then we need to let's throw the error, and then lastly we can then say, so we're first going to read from this file. Well, we probably don't, right? We probably don't need to read from this file. Actually, no, let's just not do this. But before, no, fine. Let's just read from the file. Let's make sure the file's there. Let's make sure everything is fine. We're going to write to the file. Again, we're going to now put that again there. So we're reading from it, writing to it. You can probably do that in one go, but let me just do it like this for now. And then what we want to do is we want to JSON stringify our metadata at the top, right? So the metadata object there, and that's it. Now, all we need to make sure of is that in our outputs file, we have a new file called metadata.json. Then once we have that, we're ready to go. We don't have to do anything more. I'm going to delete these 3 images and show you what the program does in its final state. All right, so I'm very excited. Let's go to index, let's run it, and let's say we want to create one image just for the time being. Let's see what it did. So here in the output file, you can see that we have metadata, which is this long string, and we have our image, and this is our image. Now let's inspect the metadata and let's inspect our image, right? So I want to move one there. Can I open the image in one? There we go. So this is now where metadata should go, and I'm going to save this so we can actually see and read it. Good. So basically what's happening here is we can see the eyeball that was created, okay? And this is the metadata of it. Now, the hash that we've defined in the metadata basically is layer element. That's why you will see this is 1, and then the element was 1. And then the layer 2 was the element 1 again. Layer 3 was 5, layer 4, and so on, right? But it's much more clear in the decoded hash that we've added, where we can see layer 1 chose 1. And when I say chose 1, I chose the first element in that stack that it has. So we also have the addition, which we know is the first artwork we've created. We have date stamp, and then we have the attributes. Now the attributes are exactly what we've defined before, but here we can really see it in action, and we can really read through it. So we can actually see that if we just move this up a little bit, we'll make that eyeball a bit smaller. If we read through the attributes, we can see that the background chose the black background, which is there at the back of the eyeball, and its rarity is just a normal original. Then we have for ID 1 on the second layer was also selected the ball, right? Basically, I'm thinking now about it. This is correct. Okay, for the ball, we selected the red eyeball, which is a bit reddish there at the back, and it's super rare. So already you can see this whole program that we wrote creates these artworks, and it gives them kind of meaning because they have recorded data in a string. And we don't only have to create one item. I mean, now the world's your oyster, right? So you can create 5 if you want to, even 100. But let's create 5 and see what happens. So there we can see edition 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 was created. And we're just going to wait for us to run. We're going to save this, and you can see that by all the code, let me just do this, by all the code here on the side, how many objects there are. So I can actually go and close off these objects like so, and you can see there they are, each one is there. They're also referenced in there. So how cool is that? And even seeing these eyes next to each other like this, guys, it just makes a perfect ending to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed coding with me. And if you really want to see more stuff like this, next, smart contracts, all these cool things, if you want to see unique ways of coding from an artist perspective, give me a shout in the comments, like, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time with much more exciting tutorials like this. Cheers for now, guys, and have an amazing